regard Henry Ford as my inspiration," were the words of Adolf Hitler only 2 years prior to becoming the German Chancellor. Although in a position of eminence and respect, Ford posed as a very controversial figure in the early and mid-1900s. Having similar views as Hitler and many other Nazi leaders, he was the first American to be awarded with the Grand Cross of the German Eagle, the most prestigious award in Nazi Germany that can be awarded to a foreigner. The Germans, including Hitler, were said to have supported and encouraged Ford for many reasons.
Although a controversial figure, Ford's automobile industry would revolutionize the everyday lives of American citizens and industrialize the process of manufacturing for centuries to come. Henry Ford utilized his position of influence among the press and in the automobile industry before, during, and after World War II to leave a lasting impact with his ardent anti-Semitism, pacifism, and environmental destruction.
Henry Ford spent his early life working on his family farm near Dearborn, Michigan. Ford would eventually rise to become one of the wealthiest and influential men in the United States of America in his time period, but he started life as any other working-class citizen.
Because of his early life, Ford understood the isolation resulting from a middle-class life spent on a small farm. One of his main aspirations was to be able to market his automobiles to lower and middle-class people, and he deeply desired to give small-town citizens the ability to travel. Henry Ford expressed that he wanted his automobiles to be so low in price that no man making a good salary will be unable to own one and enjoy with his family the blessings of hours of pleasure in God's great open spaces. Ford's statement expresses his feelings surrounding his view on the price that automobiles should be sold at.
Starting life as a middle-class boy, Ford understood the need to venture outside of a small town to see other parts of the world. To achieve this, Ford's automobiles were priced extremely low, especially his most famous car, the Model T. In 1908, more than 10,000 of them were sold for $825, a price that was unthinkable in this time period. Ford was able to lower the price of his cars further with the assembly line, a process that would quicken the assembly of his cars and bring manufacturing rates to a new high.
In 1903, Ford established the Ford Motor Company, an automobile company that he would run until it was passed down to his son. Through this company, Ford would design and create the Model T, a car that would industrialize the way automobiles were built. It was in this company that Ford would also design the assembly line and implement his $5 a day wage. Ford said, "There is one rule for the industrialist, and that is make the best quality of goods possible at the lowest cost possible, paying the highest wages possible." His heightened wages brought workers streaming to his factory doors in hopes of securing a job in the factories, an occupation that would previously been unwanted.
The assembly line was debatably one of Ford's greatest achievements in the automobile industry, providing him with a vital process to speed up the rate at which his automobiles were assembled. This new and industrialized way of assembling cars was described as smooth and efficient. To complete this process, workers stood along a moving belt, each responsible for a certain task. Although high-paying, this job was not a desirable one. Workers stood along the belt for hours at a time, repetitively enacting the same motions over and over. In the long run, Henry Ford saved a great deal of money and time due to his new assembly line.
But Ford isn't only well known for his contributions to the automobile industry. Henry Ford possessed such strong-willed beliefs of anti-Semitism that they were similar to those of Hitler. In the 1920s and 1930s, both Hitler and Ford were beginning to write and disseminate information about what they both considered to be this powerful threat, the Jew. Ford was an ardent anti-Semite, stopping at nothing to speak his mind.
And he did just that. In 1918, Ford began to publish the articles in the Dearborn Independent, his local newspaper. These newspapers were regarded with high interest and were read across the nation, as Ford was one of America's most influential leaders during his time period. He later compiled these articles into 4 books entitled The International Jew. In these volumes, he made many attacks on Jews, often generalizing the entire race to single characteristics. He even claimed, "The Jew is the originator of the waste product business of the world. He was the originator of the salvage system. He found wealth in the debris of civilization." Ford essentially credited the entire existence of evil in the world to Jews.
And because Ford was so highly followed by the press, his articles were posted in headlines globally. The Dearborn Independent was distributed and sold in Ford dealerships across the nation, allowing the newspaper to circulate around America even more. Throughout the Dearborn Independent, Ford published articles that would refer to Jews in every possible context as at the root of America and the world's ills. Ford posted his many anti-Semitic opinions as factual pieces in his articles, leading many of the readers to interpret the excerpts as fact. One of these excerpts, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, was a highly anti-Semitic piece of writing that was originally from Russia and was later translated into English. These protocols are pronounced an anti-Semitic forgery at a 1993 court ruling in Moscow. The protocols were later banned.
The Dearborn Independent was the basis of Ford's anti-Semitic views. Some people agreed with him on how he perceived the Jew, but others strongly disagreed. Many people spoke out against Ford and his views, not backing down to claim him as highly anti-Semitic, but Ford mainly disregarded what was said and continued to share his views about the world.
Henry Ford was a very avid pacifist figure when it came to the matter of war, producing few resources for the United States and its allies for World War I and even the first few years of World War II in Europe. It was the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941 that ultimately inspired him to begin mass-producing resources for the war effort. Due to the fact that World War II was total war, Ford was practically forced to donate all resources to the cause anyhow. In 1941, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Ford cleared an area of trees in Michigan in means of building the Willow Run factory. Here, Ford would create B-24 bomber planes for America and its allies. Ford created many massive assembly lines like Willow Run across the nation, allowing him to effectively build several hundred bombers a month in each location. Not only did Ford contribute bomber planes, but he also would contribute tanks, armored cars, and engines for weapons as robot bombs. His pacifist beliefs behind him. Over the course of the war, Ford supplies the Allied Army with over 1 million fighting vehicles.
Although Ford's company was perceived as a positive and influential company, there were aspects of the company behind the scenes that did not turn out as well as he planned for them to. Fordlandia was a rubber plantation that Henry Ford created in Brazil in hopes of using the rubber created for the tires of his cars. Fordlandia was a plantation consisting of rubber trees, although this plantation ultimately failed due to the bad conditions of the land. NYU professor Greg Grandin wrote a book on Ford's project entitled Fordlandia, The Rise and Fall of Henry Ford's Jungle City. In an interview in 2009, he explains the ultimate failure of Ford's plantation. He said Ford spent about $1 billion on this project and not one drop of latex made it into a Ford car. It was an absolute failure. Despite Ford's previous success in the automobile industry, he was unable to succeed in this field.
The failure of Fordlandia can be accounted for by many aspects, including certain bugs that ate away at the trees. By planting his rubber trees so close to the Amazon, Ford essentially created a large incubator. In the same interview by Greg Grandin, he explains, caterpillars and pests and blight just devastated the plantation, giving his trees little to no chance of survival. Also, the quality of food and living Ford provided his workers with were not satisfactory. All these aspects added up and conclusively led to the great failure of Fordlandia.
Despite the fact that Henry Ford was brought up as a middle-class farm boy, Ford rose to become an influential figure in the early and mid-1900s. Featured in headlines across the nation, many of Ford's ideas and views surrounding industrialization and political and social ideologies were revealed. Consequently, Henry Ford's anti-Semitism and pacifism are still topics of debate and controversy today.